Tuesday, November 11, 2024. Just after 10 a.m. Birmingham Airport stirred with its usual rhythm. Families reunited at the arrivals gate, business travelers rushed toward taxis, and holiday makers wheeled suitcases across polished floors. On the surface, it was another ordinary morning, a place of journeys and reunions. Yet beneath the hum of routine, the airport itself was preparing to play a far darker role. Birmingham was about to become the silent stage for audacious crimes, where greed and deception moved through the same halls as innocence and expectation. As passengers streamed through security checks and baggage carousels, three very different plots were already in motion. Each would expose how Britain's airports have become more than travel hubs. They are battlegrounds, where international trafficking networks clash with law enforcement, and where one mistake can collapse an empire. By the way, if you have enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video as it will encourage us to create more videos on UK organized crime. On the surface, she was every bit the picture of respectability. Farzana Kowsar, a 54-year-old grandmother from Bradford, carried herself like many women of her age, family-oriented, soft-spoken, and seemingly focused on the ordinary responsibilities of daily life. To her neighbors, she was someone who balanced motherhood and grandmotherhood with the quiet dignity that defined countless households across Britain. She blended into the rhythm of her community without question. But beneath that carefully constructed image lay a secret life. Farzana wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. She was the architect of a multi-million-pound drug trafficking pipeline, a woman who had managed to intertwine family loyalty with international crime, transforming her household into a small but tightly organized syndicate. Investigators would later describe her as the linchpin of an operation that moved staggering quantities of cocaine from Mexico to the United Kingdom, right through the halls of Birmingham Airport. What set this case apart from countless other trafficking networks was the depth of personal betrayal woven into it. Unlike typical kingpins who often shield their closest relatives from the dirtier aspects of their trade, Farzana deliberately chose to involve her family at every level. Her children weren't spared. Her daughter-in-law wasn't spared. Even trusted friends of the family were pulled into the conspiracy. For her, blood ties and marriage bonds weren't protection, they were leverage. She understood that loyalty runs deepest in family, and she exploited that devotion to build a smuggling pipeline hidden behind the veneer of family unity. Her eldest son, June Shafak, 33, became her right hand, helping to coordinate the logistics of travel and oversee operational details. Then came Mohammed Amir Shafak, 28, who acted as a courier, collecting and transporting the bags that contained their fortunes. Younger members of the family were also drawn in, Ume Mohammed, 22, and even Hamza Shafak, who was just 17 years old when the operation was active. Involving someone barely out of his teenage years underscored the recklessness of Farzana's choices. She was willing to gamble with the futures of her own children for the promise of illicit wealth. The betrayal didn't stop there. Sarah Hussein, her daughter-in-law, was absorbed into the plan, asked not to stand aside but to participate. Instead of being protected from danger, she was made part of it. Then there was Safaner, just 19 at the time, another of the youngest caught in the web. Finally, even a close family associate, Khalid Abdul Kawi, 36, was roped in. What emerged was not a loose arrangement of occasional helpers, but a structured hierarchy with Farzana at its peak. She called the shots, designed the strategies, and ensured that her family's loyalty would double as her workforce. Her betrayal wasn't just criminal, it was maternal. The brilliance, and the darkness, of the Kowsar operation was in its simplicity. To outsiders, their movements looked like nothing more than short family holidays. Trips were booked to familiar European destinations, Dublin, Amsterdam, or other short-haul cities that didn't raise suspicion. The travelers carried light luggage, sometimes no checked bags at all. But there was a hidden logic behind the bookings. Their return flights weren't random. They were carefully timed to coincide with arrivals from Cancun, Mexico. Mexico wasn't just a vacation hotspot. It was the origin point of the cocaine pipeline. Through corrupt contacts overseas, shadowy figures who coordinated shipments and ensured the bags made it to the right flights, preloaded suitcases packed with cocaine were checked onto flights bound for Birmingham. The family's role was deceptively simple: intercept. When their short-haul flights landed, the family blended seamlessly with crowds in the baggage hall. As passengers from both flights merged near the carousels, Farzana's couriers would position themselves by the belts unloading luggage from Cancun. All they had to do was lift the unaccompanied bags off the belt, pretend they were theirs, and walk casually out into the arrivals hall. There were no hidden compartments. No elaborate concealment devices. The cocaine wasn't tucked into secret linings or disguised as legitimate goods. The brilliance of the plan was its banality. Who questions a traveler lifting a bag from a carousel, especially when they already look like they've just arrived from a weekend in Dublin? It was a choreography of normality. Casual clothes, calm demeanors, quiet efficiency. If anyone looked twice, the group appeared no different from holiday makers retrieving luggage after a short trip. That illusion was everything. To succeed, the family had to blend into the background, to move like shadows hidden in plain sight. Their calm behavior was their greatest weapon. No nervous gestures, no suspicious glances, no frantic movements. Each smuggling run relied on the same formula. And for a time it worked. From August to November 2024, investigators believe the family pulled off at least 5 successful operations, moving drugs with near-military precision. Every journey strengthened Farzana's belief that her system was foolproof, that the ordinary mask of family travel would continue to protect her. But while they perfected the art of deception, they failed to account for the one constant variable: surveillance. By early November, the National Crime Agency, NCA, had been monitoring the group closely. Patterns had emerged: unexplained short trips, suspiciously timed returns, and familiar faces lingering near baggage belts. Quietly, investigators gathered intelligence, built a timeline, and prepared for the moment to strike. Before we continue, don't forget that what you are watching took us hours of both research, editing, and voicing to able to get it across to you. We plead that you show us your support by just subscribing to this channel and liking this video, as it will encourage us to create more video like this. Thank you. That moment arrived on Tuesday, November 11, 2024. As the long-haul flight from Cancun touched down, Farzana's couriers slipped into position. CCTV footage would later show them standing calmly among other travelers, their eyes fixed on the carousel where the cocaine-loaded bags would appear. 6 suitcases in total. Each one packed with blocks of cocaine. Each one a fortune. The couriers lifted the bags effortlessly, loading them onto trolleys, moving toward the terminal exits. On camera they appeared calm, almost too calm, wheeling their haul out into the open, just like any family returning from a holiday. But outside, officers were waiting. In the car park, just as the group began loading the luggage into waiting vehicles, the quiet patience of weeks of investigation exploded into action. NCA teams moved in, surrounding the suspects in a coordinated strike. Within moments, 6 individuals were in custody, and all 6 suitcases were seized before leaving the airport grounds. When the suitcases were opened, the scale of the operation finally came into focus. Inside was an astonishing 180 kilograms of high-purity cocaine. Experts estimated its wholesale value at £5 million, with a street value soaring above £14 million once broken down for distribution. Photographs released later by the Crown Prosecution Service showed neatly wrapped bricks of cocaine stacked like building blocks of the empire Farzana had been constructing. To the family, it was meant to be their fortune. To the investigators, it was the final proof of a conspiracy that had twisted family loyalty into criminal enterprise. For years, Birmingham Airport had served as a silent accomplice to the family's deception. The blending of ordinary travel with criminal purpose had fooled countless travelers, perhaps even airport staff. But on that November morning, the illusion collapsed. What had looked like just another family trip became the dismantling of an empire. A grandmother once trusted by her community was exposed as the ringleader of a cross-continental network. Her children, once seen as ordinary young adults building futures, were revealed as pawns in their mother's dangerous game. And Birmingham Airport, once again, proved itself not only a gateway for travelers but a battlefield where organized crime and law enforcement collide. While Farzana's syndicate represented the careful orchestration of family loyalty turned criminal, not all drug busts at Birmingham Airport involved such sophistication. Sometimes it was a single careless mistake, a dealer undone not by precision surveillance but by his own arrogance. Airports are often seen as fortresses of security. Every bag scanned, every passenger checked, every movement monitored. Yet for many seasoned traffickers, arrogance convinces them that these checks are just another obstacle to walk past. In February 2016, one such man stood at Birmingham Airport's departure gate. Majid Hussain, a local drug dealer whose reputation in the city's underworld carried weight. To those who knew him, Hussain was no small-time courier. He was a man who had already built a name and an empire in Birmingham's drug trade. Yet on this day he was reduced to a single passenger, standing in line like everyone else, holding a bag that would expose the true extent of his criminal life. Hussain wasn't a novice. He had moved drugs before. He had money, contacts, and the kind of influence that comes with running a thriving criminal business. Yet, on that February day he made a mistake so simple that investigators would later struggle to understand how a man of his experience could be so careless. Inside his hand luggage, packed without disguise, without concealment, was a single wrap of heroin. Not tucked into a hidden lining, not disguised in toiletries or clothing, but sitting inside his carry-on as though it were nothing more than an afterthought. When security officers performed a routine inspection, the discovery was immediate. The heroin was seized and Hussein was detained on the spot. In that moment his confidence collapsed into panic. What seemed like a minor find, a wrap of heroin in hand luggage, was enough to trigger the suspicion of experienced officers. To them it didn't look like the casual possession of a user. It looked like the sloppiness of a man who had grown arrogant in his trade. What began at the airport was just the first crack. Within hours of Hussein's detention, investigators secured warrants to search his home address on Nansen Road in Salt Lake, Birmingham. If the airport arrest was a stumble, the home raid was a complete collapse. When officers entered Hussein's property, they were confronted with the reality of who he truly was. This wasn't a man dabbling at the edges of crime, it was a dealer at the heart of a toxic operation. The first shock came in Hussein's own bedroom. Beneath his bed, officers uncovered a suitcase packed not with clothing or personal effects, but with 1 kilogram of heroin and 4 kilograms of cocaine. The street value of these drugs alone was estimated at £250,000, a figure that confirmed Hussein was far from a small player. But the drugs were only the beginning. Hidden in the property was an arsenal of weapons. Among them, a semi-automatic handgun, fully capable of lethal use, was discovered alongside 27 rounds of live ammunition. This was no casual weapon kept for protection. It was the kind of firepower associated with gangs ready to defend territory or enforce debts with violence. Even more disturbing was a stun gun cleverly disguised as a mobile phone. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary piece of technology, but in reality, it was a concealed weapon designed to incapacitate unsuspecting victims. Its very design spoke to deception, a willingness to mask violence behind everyday objects. Officers also seized an air pistol, another reminder of Hussein's preparedness to intimidate or injure. Then came the final revelation, the profits of his trade. Hidden away in the property was £300,000 in cash, bundled into stacks of banknotes. Each bundle was a silent testament to the scale of his dealings, to the countless transactions that had turned addiction and suffering into wealth. Together, the drugs, the weapons, and the cash painted a chilling picture. This wasn't just a dealer making a mistake at an airport. This was a man deeply embedded in a network of crime, living at the intersection of narcotics and violence. When Hussein's case reached Birmingham Crown Court in August 2016, the prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. The drugs, the firearms, the ammunition, the cash, it was overwhelming. Hussein, perhaps realizing there was no way out, chose to plead guilty on the opening day of his trial. The charges he admitted to were extensive. Possession of a prohibited firearm. Possession of a disguised firearm. Possession of ammunition. Possession of Class A drugs with intent to supply. Possession of criminal property. The admissions confirmed what investigators had suspected from the start. The wrap of heroin at the airport was never the full story. It was only the loose thread that, when pulled, unraveled an empire. During sentencing, Judge Patrick Thomas QC offered a sharp assessment of what Hussein represented. He described the combination of drugs and firearms as a toxic mixture, one that posed a direct danger to the wider public. The message was clear. A man who could stockpile narcotics while keeping lethal weapons at hand was not simply a dealer, but a threat to the community. Hussein was sentenced to 12 years in prison. But even behind bars, his punishment wasn't finished. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act, prosecutors pushed to reclaim the wealth he had accumulated through illegal activity. In December 2017, the court ruled that Hussein had benefited by hundreds of thousands of pounds from his empire. He was ordered to repay £295,000 within 3 months or face an additional 3 years on top of his 12-year sentence. A further £33,000 in criminal benefit remained outstanding, to be reclaimed once more assets were identified. For investigators, Hussein's downfall was as fascinating as it was frustrating. This was a man with the discipline to build an operation that moved significant quantities of Class A drugs, with enough money to stockpile hundreds of thousands in cash, and with the ruthlessness to keep firearms ready in his bedroom. Yet he was undone not by an elaborate sting, not by a confidential informant, but by his own arrogance. He walked into Birmingham Airport with heroin casually packed in his hand luggage, as if his reputation and his confidence could carry him through security. It was a miscalculation that destroyed everything. Majid Hussein's empire didn't collapse because of police ingenuity alone. It collapsed because he underestimated the smallest detail. His downfall serves as a reminder that in the world of organized crime, it isn't always the complex plans that fail. Sometimes, it's the simplest oversight, the kind that makes an empire look untouchable one day and leaves it in ruins the next. For all his weapons, wealth, and influence, it was a single wrap of heroin that cracked open the empire of a Birmingham drug dealer and left him behind bars, stripped of his fortune and remembered not for his power but for his carelessness. By late 2021, Birmingham Airport had already seen its share of trafficking plots unravel. Some were dismantled by weeks of surveillance, others by careless mistakes. But the story of Mohammed Azhar Rashid, a 35-year-old man from Oldham in Greater Manchester, showed yet another truth. Even calmness and composure are no guarantees of success when you're carrying a fortune in narcotics. It was November 2021, and Rashid had just landed on a flight from Sialkot, Pakistan via Dubai. To the untrained eye, he was nothing more than another weary traveler stepping off a long-haul flight. His movements were smooth, his demeanor composed. CCTV footage later released by investigators showed Rashid wheeling his luggage with the steady rhythm of a man entirely at ease. He didn't fidget. He didn't glance nervously around the hall. He didn't break stride. If body language is often the first tell of a nervous courier, Rashid appeared to have mastered the art of stillness. Inside his suitcase, however, was a consignment that could never pass unnoticed: 18 kilograms of heroin, tightly wrapped and carefully concealed, destined for the streets of Britain. Unlike some smugglers who try to slip through security with false bottoms and suitcases or elaborate concealment tricks, Rashid's method was far less complicated. He carried the drugs directly in his checked luggage, counting on one thing to get him through: confidence. He seemed to believe that if he behaved like any ordinary passenger, customs officials would have no reason to look twice. And in fairness, his performance was convincing. To the average traveler passing by, Rashid was invisible, just another man pushing his bags toward the exit. But what he didn't realize was that border force officers had already singled him out. His name, his route, and his movements raised quiet red flags. And his calm exterior, far from erasing suspicion, only deepened it. Rashid was directed to a secondary search area. Officers began inspecting his baggage, lifting out clothing and personal effects until they reached the carefully wrapped packages buried within. What they uncovered was staggering: 18 kilograms of heroin of exceptionally high purity. Forensic analysis would later confirm purity levels between 66% and 71%, a level rarely seen by the time narcotics reach street circulation. In practical terms, it meant the consignment was worth an estimated £900,000, a figure that could multiply several times over once the heroin was cut and sold at street level. The calmness that had carried Rashid this far was shattered in an instant. The illusion of normality crumbled when confronted with the undeniable evidence now spread across the inspection table. For investigators, the drugs were already enough to secure charges. But the real insight into Rashid's role came from his mobile phone. Hidden among ordinary contacts and apps were WhatsApp messages that exposed the mechanics of the smuggling network. Rashid hadn't been acting alone. He was in constant communication with a handler in Pakistan, referred to simply as brother. The messages revealed a chilling level of control. As Rashid moved through each stage of his journey, brother offered instructions and reassurance, monitoring him almost like a puppet master pulling strings. One message in particular stood out to investigators. Just as Rashid approached airport security, his anxiety apparently rising, brother sent him a line meant to soothe: "Remain tension-free. God will be generous." The words, simple and spiritual on the surface, carried a darker weight in context. It was reassurance designed to steady Rashid's nerves, a reminder that he was just one cog in a far larger machine. To investigators, it was proof that Rashid was not a lone smuggler but a courier in a professional network that spanned continents. The phone evidence made one fact unmistakable: Rashid was not the mastermind. He was not the financier. He was not the handler. He was the courier, the one chosen to carry the risk while others remained safely offshore. This is the reality of international trafficking. Networks recruit men like Rashid with promises of money or pressure disguised as opportunity. They are given flights, instructions, sometimes even spiritual comfort, but in truth they are disposable. If caught, the organization simply finds another courier, another suitcase, another route. Rashid's calm demeanor may have fooled casual observers, but it did nothing to protect him from the inevitability of his role. His fate had been sealed the moment he agreed to carry those 18 kilograms. By May 2022, Rashid stood before Birmingham Crown Court. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The drugs in his luggage, the forensic confirmation of purity, the WhatsApp messages tying him to a handler abroad. There was no plausible denial. Faced with the inevitable, Rashid entered a guilty plea to the importation of Class A drugs. His calm composure in the airport gave way to the quiet resignation of a man who knew the weight of the law was bearing down on him. The sentence, 9 years in prison. For some, it may have seemed lenient compared to the value of the drugs involved, but the message was unmistakable. Rashid's attempt to mask a fortune in narcotics with nothing more than calm confidence had failed, and he would now spend nearly a decade behind bars. The story of Mohammed Azayar Rashid is a stark reminder that confidence isn't enough to beat the system. He carried himself with the poise of a man who believed he could walk through customs unnoticed, but composure cannot erase the red flags of intelligence-led policing. For investigators, his case also underscored a wider truth. Couriers like Rashid are not unique. They are interchangeable links in an international chain, recruited, reassured, and discarded when caught. His calmness didn't save him. His loyalty to his handler didn't protect him. In the end, Rashid was just another disposable piece in a network far larger than himself. At Birmingham Airport, his story joined the growing list of cautionary tales. A reminder that no matter how convincing the performance, the system eventually sees through the mask. When the dust finally settled, the spectacle of Birmingham Airport's November 2024 sting gave way to the cold weight of courtroom justice. For Farzana Kawsar and her family, the masks of ordinary life had been stripped away. No longer were they travelers blending into the bustle of arrivals. They were defendants standing before a judge, their futures balanced on the evidence laid bare against them. At the heart of the case was Farzana Kawsar, the grandmother-turned-mastermind whose betrayal of family bonds had formed the backbone of the operation. The court described her as the linchpin, the strategist who had weaponized family loyalty to build an international pipeline of cocaine. Her sentence reflected the scale of her role, 13 years and 4 months in prison. A punishment that underscored the damage she had caused not only to her community, but to her own bloodline. Her children, once drawn in under her authority, faced their own reckoning. June Shafak, 33, who acted as her lieutenant, received 10 years and 9 months. Muhammad Amir Shafak, 28, entrusted as a courier, was handed 8 years and 9 months. Ume Muhammad, 22, another courier caught in the machinery of the plot, received 8 years and 1 month. Hamza Shafak, the youngest at just 17 when the smuggling runs took place, was dealt with separately as a youth. By the time of trial he had turned 18, and though his fate was postponed until October 2025, it was already clear that his life path had been altered irreversibly. Even those at the periphery of the family were not spared. Safaner, just 19 years old, received 7 years and 2 months, her youth unable to shield her from the severity of the conspiracy. Sarah Hussein, 27, the daughter-in-law, was given a 2-year sentence suspended for 2 years, narrowly escaping prison but marked forever by her involvement. And the lone outsider, Khaled Abdul Qawi, 36, a trusted friend pulled into the orbit of the Kawsar family, was sentenced to 10 years and 9 months. One by one the names were called, the sentences read, and the empire crumbled into fragments. What had once been presented to the community as a tightly knit family was revealed instead as a criminal syndicate, shattered by greed, loyalty twisted into chains, and a mother who had gambled with the futures of her children. The story of the Bradford family was more than a headline about drug trafficking. It was a cautionary tale of generational damage. Farzana's choices didn't just bring cocaine into Britain. They pulled teenagers into crime, handed them criminal records before adulthood, and robbed them of futures that might have been lived in education, careers, or family life. The irony was stark. A mother whose role is meant to nurture and protect, had instead sacrificed her own children on the altar of international crime. The bonds of trust that should have anchored her family became the very tools she used to expand her empire. When placed alongside the other cases at Birmingham Airport, a pattern emerges. Farzana Kawsar's family plot revealed the devastation caused when loyalty is weaponized, when a parent recruits their children not into safety but into danger. Majid Hussein's downfall demonstrated the fatal consequences of arrogance, how a single careless wrap of heroin exposed an entire empire of drugs, weapons, and cash. Mohammed Azayar Rashid's calm smuggle showed the futility of confidence, How even the smoothest performance cannot erase the fact that couriers are disposable, managed from afar and discarded when caught. Together, these stories strip away the myths of organized crime. They show that no matter how carefully orchestrated, no matter how powerful the empire, and no matter how calm the courier, the collapse is inevitable. Airports are more than transit points. They are mirrors reflecting the ingenuity of organized crime and the determination of law enforcement. Every carousel, every customs check, every boarding gate becomes a crossroads where greed meets vigilance, and where fortunes are either smuggled in or seized before they leave the ground. At Birmingham Airport, these three stories collided not just by coincidence, but by inevitability. Because where networks gamble with audacity, investigators wait with patience. And sooner or later the mask always slips. These stories are reminders that behind every flight and every suitcase, investigators are watching. Which of these three cases shocked you the most? The mother who sacrificed her children, the dealer undone by arrogance, or the courier fooled by false promises? Let us know in the comments. If you found this breakdown compelling, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next case. This has been Vault Sime, where we uncover the hidden battles fought at Britain's airports. Friday, July 14, 2017. It was 11:45 p.m. on Bradford's Sully Line. The streets were silent. Pavements empty. Streetlights hummed over rows of houses where nothing looked unusual. But beneath the silence, something pulsed, a phone line that never stopped ringing. Calls came in by the hundreds, then by the thousands. At first it looked like nothing more than ordinary traffic. But this wasn't customer service, and it wasn't a hotline for emergencies. This was the Sully Line, a number that would change the face of Bradford's underworld. Elsewhere, in a quiet Manchester home, tins were hidden away in a bedroom wardrobe. To neighbors, the woman inside was just another mother of three. By day she worked in childcare. By night, her house became the heartbeat of a drug network. And years later, in a Bradford basement, police discovered something that felt like it belonged in a thriller, not real life. A heavy steel canister so well disguised that when officers turned the valve, actual gas hissed out, masking the true cargo inside. Three very different stories. A phone line, a family home, a disguised canister. All connected by one trade, heroin and cocaine flooding the streets of the UK. This is the untold story of how the Sully Line rose from a single number to a multi-million-pound empire, and how police dismantled it piece by piece. But most people will never hear the full story, they'll click away before the truth comes out. Don't. Subscribe now, because in a moment you'll see just how deep this empire ran, and why no one in Bradford ever felt safe again. Bradford. 2012. A city with a history written in industry and migration, but also one shadowed by poverty and addiction. In the streets of Manningham, one stretch stood out, Sully Line. For years, residents had seen the telltale signs, brief exchanges on corners, anonymous faces moving in and out of houses, whispers of supply. Police knew it. Locals lived with it. But no one yet understood how one phone number was about to rewrite the rules of the drug trade. It began quietly, almost invisibly. Just digits on a slip of paper, passed from user to user. No advertising. No faces. No names. Just a number that delivered. Customers called, placed an order, and within minutes, a handoff was made. Heroin. Crack cocaine. Small wraps exchanged in seconds. This was what investigators would later call the ring and bring model. For addicts, it meant reliability. For dealers, it meant money without pause. And for the architects behind it, it meant control. At the top of the line were three men. Not shadowy figures in distant boardrooms, but locals, young, ambitious, and determined to build an empire. First was Mohammed Ayaz, a 29-year-old from Undercliff. Organized, sharp, and respected among his peers. Ayaz was no street hustler. He was the planner, the one who made sure the system never broke. Beside him was his younger brother, Mohammed Assan, 26, cut from the same cloth. If Ayaz was the strategist, Assan was the enforcer, embedded in the day-to-day mechanics of supply. Together, they formed a sibling partnership that made the Sully Line feel less like a gang, and more like a family business. Completing the trio was Aslam, 34. Trusted. Steady. The third pillar of leadership. Where Ayaz and Assan provided blood loyalty, Aslam added balance. Another set of eyes, another voice ensuring the system didn't falter. They weren't just bosses. They were directors. Each had their shift, their hours of control. Day. Night. The line never slept because someone was always at the wheel. They didn't sit by the phone themselves, they managed, delegated, and made sure the dealers below them never missed a call. This was more than street crime. It was infrastructure. From Manningham outward, the Sully Line grew. A city was divided into zones of supply, and Lum Lane became the nucleus. Soon, what began as a single number evolved into Bradford's most reliable, most dominant pipeline for Class A drugs. Users didn't care who ran it. They cared that it worked, that the number always answered, that the delivery always came. And that's exactly how the directors designed it. But an empire needs more than leaders. It needs hands to keep it alive. Beneath Ayaz, Assan, and Aslam stood a hierarchy of operators, storemen who guarded the stock, drivers who carried it, and street-level dealers who handed it out in dark alleys, at bus stops and outside corner shops. Each played their part in a pyramid that generated thousands of pounds a week, funneling straight back to the top. The Sully Line wasn't just a number. It was a system. Stable, continuous, and ruthlessly efficient. For the directors, it was profit. For the community, it was poison disguised as order. But here's the truth, even the strongest systems carry the seeds of their own downfall. Every handoff, every delivery, every call left traces. And in time, those traces would form a map leading police straight to the heart of Lum Lane. What began as a phone number was about to become one of the largest criminal investigations West Yorkshire had ever seen. Most people would have missed the signs, would you? If this was your street, would you have spotted the pattern or walked past it like everyone else? Tell me in the comments. And if you don't want to miss how this story unravels, subscribe now, because the next twist shows just how deep this network went. Empires don't survive on leaders alone. The Sully Line thrived because of the hidden hands. The workers in the shadows, the men and women who kept the machine running hour after hour. If the directors were the architects, these were the cogs, spinning quietly but relentlessly. One of the most important was Amir Rahman, known inside the network as the Storeman. He wasn't on the streets and he wasn't answering phones. His job was simple but critical: guard the stock. From his modest home on Lum Lane, Rahman became the keeper of the Sully Line's lifeblood, bundles of heroin and crack cocaine, carefully packaged, weighed, and ready to be dispatched. His house turned into a warehouse, and for his loyalty he earned hundreds of pounds every week. To his neighbors he was just another resident. To the line he was irreplaceable. Then there was Sheraz Mahmood, the phone man. His task wasn't physical. It was technical. He made sure the number never died. When police traced one SIM card, Mahmood had another ready. When calls needed to be diverted, he handled it. Every technical safeguard, every swap, every reroute, it was Mahmood's responsibility. In a network built on a single phone line, he was the guardian of communication. Without him, the Sully Line would have fallen silent. And beneath them, the streets were alive with dealers. Some were seasoned men, hardened by years in the trade. Others were heartbreakingly young. One of them was Harim Hussein, barely out of her teens. Still a teenager when she joined, Harim carried wraps of heroin and crack through Bradford's neighborhoods. Sometimes she worked alone, other times with her driver, Mohammed Vanid Khan, a man twice her age. Together they answered the ringing phone, making deliveries in alleys, on curbs, in parked cars. For Harim it was supposed to be quick money. But in reality, it was a trap, binding her to a system that cared nothing for her youth. Others joined the retail tier. Mohammed Zahid from Leeds, Mohammed Asfan from Bradford. Both part of the chain, their job to push supply directly into the hands of users. David Coates, once a soldier who had worn a uniform with pride, now carried drugs instead of weapons. Shahzad Salem, another local man, added his efforts to the runs. Luqman Nazir coordinated deals, moving in and out of the network. Even Malachi Hodgson, a talented footballer with a promising future, found himself tangled in the Sully Line, his career swapped for cash made in shadows. It was a pyramid, each level feeding the one above. From directors at the top to street dealers at the bottom, every role had purpose. And that's what made the Sully Line so powerful, not chaos but order. A criminal empire running like a business. Yet, behind the mechanics of supply there was something darker. These weren't just names on a charge sheet, they were people whose lives had diverged in tragic ways. A teenager who might have gone to university. A soldier who once served his country. A footballer who could have played under stadium lights. The Sully Line didn't just destroy communities with drugs, it consumed the people working for it. Still, efficiency has its weakness. What gave the Sully Line stability also made it noticeable. A system so consistent, so dependable, that it began to leave a pattern. And patterns, once seen, can never be unseen. The very structure that kept the Sully Line alive, the phone man, the storeman, the couriers, was about to betray them. The footprints they left would lead investigators directly into the heart of Manningham. What do you think? Should young people like Harim or Hodgson be punished as harshly as the leaders, or shown mercy for being pulled in so young? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you're still watching, you already see the cracks forming in the Sully Line. Don't miss the next revelation. Subscribe now before the trail goes deeper. For years, the Sully Line had blended into Bradford's background noise. To outsiders, it looked like nothing more than the daily ebb and flow of city life. Cars pulling up, quick exchanges, anonymous faces disappearing into side streets. But to those living on Lum Lane, something felt different. The activity wasn't random anymore. It was constant. Relentless. Residents began to complain. Mothers walking children to school saw the same cars pulling up at odd hours. Shopkeepers noticed unfamiliar faces, always staying just long enough for a handoff. To the community, it was suffocating. To police, it was a signal. The first real clue didn't come from a raid. It came from numbers. Detectives began to look closer at the traffic on one particular phone line, the same line residents whispered about. What they found was staggering. Between July 2017 and August 2018, the Sully Line handled over 229,000 calls. On paper, it looked like a call center. But these weren't customer complaints or appointment bookings. Each call was short, repetitive, and often traced back to phone boxes across the city. The pattern was clear. Orders placed, orders answered, drugs delivered. Over and over, day and night. This was the paradox. The Sully Line had designed itself to be invisible, rotating SIM cards, diverting calls, rerouting whenever a number was compromised. But that very effort to stay hidden created a footprint. To investigators, the constant switching wasn't camouflage, it was a red flag. Surveillance teams were deployed. Plainclothes officers parked quietly along Lum Lane, cameras recording the comings and goings. They watched deliveries leave Rahman's house, the storeman turning his home into a warehouse. They tracked couriers as they moved through the city. They began seizing phones, pulling SIM cards, and mapping every number. Each recovery gave police another thread, and soon those threads wove into a web that matched the Sully Line's pyramid exactly. Directors at the top, operators in the middle, dealers at the bottom. The operation was no longer untouchable. It was charted, documented, and ready to be dismantled. One story highlighted just how deep the investigation had cut. Mujahid Mahmood, one of the trusted operators, tried to convince the jury he was nothing more than an ordinary man. He claimed unemployment, an old second-hand car, and only £60 in his bank account. He insisted he wasn't the type to be pulling in millions. For a moment he almost sounded believable. But then came the twist. Released on bail during his trial, Mahmood vanished. Instead of returning to court, he boarded a flight to Islamabad. The case continued without him, and he was convicted in his absence. The empire he'd worked so hard to protect had collapsed around him, and yet he chose to run. His disappearance only cemented the scale of the operation in the public's mind. Meanwhile, stash houses were raided. Inside Rahman's property, officers uncovered stockpiles of heroin and crack cocaine. Bundles of cash. Digital records pointing directly back to the line. Every seizure, no matter how small, painted the same picture. This was industrial-scale supply, carefully managed but now unraveling. By 2018 the walls were closing in. Surveillance, call data, community reports, all roads pointed to the same conclusion. The Sully Line wasn't just another street-level network. It was a business worth millions. And like all businesses, once you understood its systems you could shut it down. The next step wasn't watching anymore. It was acting. Armed with months of evidence, West Yorkshire police prepared for the strike that would bring the Sully Line to its knees. If this was your street, would you have noticed the pattern, or walked by thinking nothing was wrong? Tell me in the comments. And if you don't want to miss what happened when police finally made their move, subscribe now, because the next chapter shows how an empire collapsed in court. The day finally came when silence broke. Months of surveillance, raids, and phone seizures had built a case so overwhelming that even the Sully Line's leaders could no longer hide. Their empire, once invisible, was dragged into the harsh light of Bradford Crown Court. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters filled the benches. Families of those accused sat in the gallery, whispering in disbelief. On one side of the aisle stood the men who had built a business that never closed. On the other, prosecutors armed with evidence. Thousands of phone records, bags of seized drugs, wads of cash, and the testimony of officers who had pieced the puzzle together. Judge Jonathan Rose presided. His words would later echo across headlines. This was a wicked and greedy trade. A business that never closes. One that exploited addiction, ruined families, and treated people as customers to be drained. At the top of the pyramid, sentences fell hardest. Muhammad Ayaz, the 29-year-old organizer, received 13 years and 2 months. His younger brother, Muhammad Assan, 26, was jailed for 11 years and 4 months. Beside them, Tasawwur Aslam, 34, was handed 10 years. But the law didn't stop at the directors. Beneath them, the lieutenants faced their reckoning. Amir Rahman, the storeman, received 8.5 years. Sheraz Mahmood, the phone man, was sentenced to more than 5 years for ensuring the line never went silent. And then there was Mujahid Mahmood, the man who fled mid-trial to Islamabad. Convicted in his absence, he was sentenced to 10 years, with investigators later valuing his profits at more than £2.5 million. When he eventually returned to the UK, justice waited. He was rearrested and given extra time for failing to surrender. Then came the street-level operatives, the faces most users saw, but who had reaped the least reward. Harim Hussain, just 22, received 3 years and 9 months. Her driver, Muhammad Vanid Khan, 45, was jailed for 4 years and 2 months. Muhammad Zahid and Muhammad Asfan were given shorter terms, both under 3 years. David Coates, the former soldier, received 4 years. Shahzad Salim got 18 months, while Luqman Nazir was handed 3.5 years. And then there was Malachi Hodgson, the young footballer. The judge described him as a man of good character who had made a grave mistake. He avoided prison, receiving a suspended sentence with unpaid work and a curfew. 80 years in total. 80 years that drew a line under one of Bradford's most prolific criminal networks. But behind every number was a life broken. The addict who called for their next fix. The teenager who chose the wrong friends. The soldier who never found his way home. For the community, the sentences were relief, but not celebration. Addiction still gripped the streets. Families still buried loved ones lost to drugs. The Sully Line was gone, but the demand it had fed remained. And Bradford wasn't finished. While one network crumbled in court, other secrets were surfacing. A mother hiding tins of crack in her wardrobe, and a gas canister concealing a fortune in cocaine. Do you think the sentences matched the crimes? Were 80 years enough for an empire that destroyed so many lives, or not nearly enough? Tell me below. And if you want the truth about the cases that followed, subscribe now. You won't believe how ordinary homes hid extraordinary crimes. As the Sully Line's leaders settled into their prison terms, another story unfolded, not in Bradford's alleys but behind closed doors in Manchester. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary family home. A nursery worker, a mother of 3, working shifts to provide for her children. Her name was Amira Noor, and to her neighbors she was just another parent navigating life's daily struggles. But behind the wardrobe in her bedroom, detectives found something else. Tins. Inside them, 403 wraps of crack cocaine and 363 wraps of heroin. Alongside the wraps were bulk quantities worth far more when cut down for street sale. The estimated value? Over £115,000. Freezer bags, scales, even a spoon stained with brown powder told the story. This wasn't casual possession. It was a business. Her partner, Michael Hassan, was already known to police, a repeat Class A dealer with a history of prison time. Their relationship had transformed Noor's home into an outpost for supply. She even rented cars, nearly 10 of them, to help Hassan move stock between Moss Side and Bolton. By day, Noor tucked her children into bed. By night, she fueled a network that profited from addiction. When their case reached Manchester Crown Court, the judge was blunt. Noor wasn't a victim. She wasn't coerced. She was a willing participant, described as confident, capable, and fully aware of what was happening. She received 4 years and 1 month. Hassan got 6 years and 8 months. And just as that case shocked Manchester, Bradford was about to reveal another secret. In 2021, surveillance officers watched as Farouk Mir, a 44-year-old with a history of violence, carried a heavy canister into a property on Cornwall Place. To the untrained eye, it was nothing unusual. A gas cylinder during a home renovation. But when investigators opened it, real gas hissed out, a clever disguise. Inside the shell, officers discovered 14 kilograms of high-purity cocaine hidden in plain sight. The street value? Over £1 million. The search didn't stop there. Another property revealed heat sealers, an angle grinder, and a banknote counter, the tools of industrial-scale trafficking. In the garden, they even found a semi-automatic pistol. For this, Mir was sentenced to 18 years. His associate, Safraz Latif, received 11 years. these cases showed something chilling. It wasn't just phone lines or shadowy street corners. Drugs were hidden in wardrobes, basements, and canisters that hissed with gas. Ordinary homes concealed extraordinary crimes. When you walk down your own street, how can you ever really know what's happening behind closed doors? The Sully Line proved an empire can grow from something as simple as a phone number. Noor and Hassan showed how family homes can mask double lives. Mir and Latif revealed how traffickers engineer deception with frightening sophistication. You've stayed with me to the end? Most people never do. That means you see the truth others ignore. Subscribe now because the next case takes us even deeper. The British-Pakistani family exposed in £14 million cocaine Birmingham airport bust. Miss it and you'll miss the kind of story that changes how you see the world around you.